Hello, this is Patrick from XPression. I'd like to show you some of the new font handling tools in XPression Maps 3.2 and higher. I'm in XPression Maps and I've got an example map up here just so that I can work with some content. And my art director has told me that they'd like to change the fonts in some of the content we're using here. So I'm going to create a new text tool in my drawing toolbox. So I'm going to come into Maps and I'm going to find up on top of my drawing toolbox, and again that's on the Drawing Tools tab. I'm going to click on the New Drawing tool. That brings up the Drawing Management Editor and the new drawing type, and I'm going to choose from my drawing types Text. I'm going to click OK, and that will bring up the Drawing Management Editor tool. First off, I'm going to change this. I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to call it Text Tool 2.0, and it is a text item. Now I'm going to come in here from left to right and go over the tabs quickly, and we're going to bounce in and out of them. General is very basic information about how these drawing tools work. This is text, so it's a left to right. If I was working in some other Asian languages and some of the Middle Eastern languages, I would find that I need to go right to left instead of left to right. I'm going to leave it as left to right because that's what I'm working in. My default text, I'm going to change it to text goes here, and I typed it in initial caps, and you'll see why later. The default scale, this has to do with how I put this on the map and when I put it on the map, what it will do when I scale up from that point. And also auto scale means when I put it on the map and I set a scale size, if I zoom the map in or out, it will stay the size I've created it and it won't change even though the map may or may not zoom. X and Y offset we'll talk about in a little bit. Visibility, let's talk about this very quickly. When I put a map object on the screen from my drawing toolbox, it could be there all the time. Zoom level 0 means I'm zoomed all the way out, so I'm way out in space. Right now you look at my zoom level, I'm set at a zoom level of 191. I'm going to compromise this a little bit. I'm going to say that this will appear at a zoom level of 175, and my transition time will be half a second, and my transition or effect type, I'm going to change it to be typewriter. My out transition, I'm going to make it be wipe, and I'm going to have it wipe out at 195. And I'm going to have that also be a half a second transition. So let's just start with that and let's see what we get. So I'm going to take that in here. I'm going to put this out on my map viewport, and I've got that in here. I'm going to use my scroll wheel to zoom below 185. So I'm zooming out, and you can see that wiped off. So right now, if you look at the text box, you'll see that the icon is showing me that the text is hidden. I'm going to use my scroll to zoom in, and you'll see that it types on, and the eyeball is showing me that it's showing instead of hidden. I'm going to continue zooming, and you're going to see I'm going to get past 195, and it will wipe off the screen, and there it went. And if I reverse it, again, it will look almost the same between a wipe and a dissolve, or typewriter, I should say. So I'm going to change this to being a wipe in the opposite direction. And I'm also going to change my effect on to be a dissolve. So I'm going to click that, and now you'll see again, I'm going to zoom past it. So you'll see it fade on, and you'll see it wipe off. That's perfect for what I do. That's what I need right now. We'll worry about other pieces later. Now, I'm also going to change some of the text that's in here. So I'm going to double click on it. All right, so I put more text in there. Now I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose Edit Drawing on that text object. I'm going to move this over. Now the changes that I make in here are not going to happen automatically on output under most cases. You will see the changes happen down here in the preview section, but not in here. Next piece I'm going to go over to is Label. This is where I choose the font that I'm working with in colors. So I'm going to start with the font. I don't like this font as much. I have a different one in here called Country Label, but if I want to pick something else, I can click on the Browse tool, and I can see different fonts on my computer. They don't have to be installed in this computer, but I'm going to choose some that are. And I'm going to come down here. I'm using one called Open Sans for my new graphics look. My station has purchased all the fonts and the rights to it, so I have access to it. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to choose Open Sans Extra Bold. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to leave that set as is and click OK there. And you can see I now have that font in there, and that placed it in. And you can see my font down here is now that same extra bold. Next thing I want to do is I want to change it from black to white, and there's a whole bunch of colors already in here. And again, I could go in and create my own colors if I wanted to by adding in the RGB values. So if I add another selection, it will let me pick the color, and you can see that it's plotting all the RGB values. That also works with the HTML5 hex value colors, so I could have done that as well. And if I do that, that's where it's going to go. I'm going to change it back to a different color here. I'm going to change it back to plain old TV white. And TV white is basically about 90% white, and you can see that that doesn't make any changes here. When I click done, you'll see the change. Now I want you to notice the text object. There's a handle here. This is where I'm literally moving that text, and what you're going to see is I have it's centered in the middle, so horizontal and vertical, and that's the access point where it gets pinned onto the object. And if I do any rotations, for example, if I was to grab that handle, it rotates around the center. You can kind of see how that happens. Now, I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to play with this a little more. So if I go and edit my drawing, move my drawing tool over, go back to my label, you can see that my alignment is center and center. So if I change it to be left aligned, and I'm going to choose it to be bottom, I click done. See where that axis point moved to? It's to the bottom left. So as I rotate that around now, it's more like a flag or a chopping block than it was where it was spinning around its centered axis. So that's what that has settings for. I'm going to come back and right click edit drawing again. I'm going to play with this a little more. I'm going to go into background. And by background, this is where right now I've got nothing behind it. I'm going to choose color, and again the color pickers work the same way. I'm going to choose a dark blue, and you can see the example down here, and that's fine. If I wanted to use an image instead, I could use an image. I don't have anything in here, but again I could browse to it and find assets that I want to use for it. I'm not going to bother with that at this point. I'm going to take that and I'm going to remove that by choosing nothing. Instead, what I do want to do is add an outline. And I'm going to choose outline. I'm going to go back to my plain old TV white again. And again, I could have browsed to do different color sizes. And I can also change the width of my outline. So I'm going to make it be 2 so you can see it. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my scale of Y, and I'm going to increase that. And Y is generally height, but you can see as I increase that, it's kind of giving me a little bit of padding around the whole box. So I'm going to say done. And now you can see what I've got. I've got a box on the screen with blue background, my text is in it, and the white background and the text are the same, or the white border I should say are the same. I'm going to edit again, and I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to move my stuff over. I've talked about background. We'll come back and play with more of this in a little bit. I'm going to go now to a call out. So I have a couple of different call out types. I have arrow and line. I'll do arrow first. When I said arrow is a call out type, I'm going to leave the rest of this alone for a minute. I'm going to come back over to the General tab. Remember I said I would talk about these X and Y offsets? Well, here we are. My Y offset, I'm going to make this be a higher number. I'm going to make this be about 2, just to make it obvious. So when I change that to 2, you can see that the text box moved up, and I now see my arrow. If I set that back to 0, or I get close to it, the arrow goes away. So you can see if you want to make this a subtle or obvious arrow change. And I also want to change the callout type, so you can see it. I can change it from arrow to line. And when I change it to line, it's kind of hard to see, but it's literally just a line there, and I can change the width of that line if I wanted to do that. I'm going to go back to arrow, and I'm going to change this to arrow, and I'm going to choose from automatic, my alignment. I'm going to make it be center, and I'm going to go back here and I'm going to change my offset back to 0. And what you're going to notice, not to 0, I should say. I'm going to make that be more like 2. And when I come back there to my arrow and I place that out there and I move this around, I'm going to put a new one on screen. I now have an arrow tool, so I can see what I'm repositioning. And that's taking it over to that alignment point. So if I come back in here and I change my drawing edit and I make my label aligned center and center, and I put a new one out there on screen, guess what? Now it's to the center. Let's say besides having the arrow call out there, I also want to have a marker. I'm going to come into the marker tab. I'm going to choose an image, and I don't see one here that I want, so I'm going to go into my navigation tools and I'm going to add, let's say, this untitled 45. That's the blue icon that we want to use. And if I've chosen a PNG or a TIFF or a target and there's a bunch of them with numbers, it'll ask if I want to load a sequence, and I don't. I just want to load a single. So I now have that as untitled 45. I can change that name elsewhere, but I'm going to leave it alone for now. But what you can see is I now have a blue dot that goes with all this. So now you can see that I have that. And again, if I take any of these and I drag them around, by default, unless I drag it by the axis point, it moves the object. If I grab it by the axis point, then I can move it on my map. So let's come back here and play with this just a little bit more. If I go to Edit Drawing, move this over again, I'm going to go back to my callout. My alignment is center as opposed to automatic. I can change my offsets for my arrows. I can change my width of my arrows. I can change my label offsets. These are different than playing with them in here. What I want to do is I'm going to change this, so instead of coming from the bottom, I'm going to come from the right side of it. So now as I change that X offset, what you're going to see, it looks like I'm just making it smaller and smaller. It's because that's how big my preview window is. But if I want to have it set up so that I've got a marker that when I drag it out on my map, the dot and then the text comes off to the right, that's the default position of it. So I could choose that and play with the ability to alter the text position if I need to, but this is the default setting, and I could make one default left, I could make one default right. One last piece that we didn't play with yet, let's come back over here and move this over again. If I go to my background, I can add a shadow to it. So right now I'm going to add a black shadow, and you'll see that it's kind of here. It's kind of hard to see because I'm so small, but it's up to the top, and normally most people would have a shadow fall to the lower right. It's just kind of what we've gotten accustomed to. The distance right now, I could increase it, and you can kind of see that it's going to get a little bigger. And I've chosen black. If I had a color that was slightly less done, so in other words, it's a black with 50% transparency, now you see what I've got here. I've got some transparency on that object, and it follows wherever I push it. So there's a lot of things you can play with here, and we've gone over a lot of the tools and tips for playing with text. Let's change one more thing, the markers. I forgot about this. Let's go back into that marker, move this over to the side, and instead of it being behind, let's make it be in front. So you have a choice. You can set that up how you want that default. What is your art department's requirements? In this way, when your newsroom users are working with this, they get everything that you specify. When your artists are working with it, they have less decisions to make because everything's been defined. So these are the new tools for working with text inside of the XPression Maps 3.2 software.